YouTube and live stream? Yes, it is. So welcome to the public for this special briefing session of the Education, Health, Environmental Affairs Committee today. We're moving too quickly for me. Starting off today with the superintendent of schools for the state of Maryland, Mohammed Chowdhury. He will give us an update on what's happening around the state regarding instruction and any new initiatives. And then we'll let him go through his presentation, and then the committee will have an opportunity to ask questions. He will be followed on a second briefing on cybersecurity from the council. That obviously has a particular meaning given what's been happening and the need for us to be vigilant when it comes to hacks and as such, as we've seen what's happened with the Department of Health here in Maryland. Let me remind the committee that the focus of today's presentation from the Superintendent Chowdhury is about instruction, what initiatives, where we have challenges. We're going to try to minimize focus on COVID and mask and those kind of policies in the 24 jurisdictions. We're looking at big picture. In some ways, there might be a question about how we overcome any instructional deficiencies that have happened over the last 2 years and other effects of our children going to our schools in our 24 counties. So with that, I want to bring to you the new superintendent who had a chance to meet and speak to numbers of times, and very appreciative he's here in Maryland. Welcome, Superintendent Chowdhury.
Right, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Pinsky and Vice Chair Kagan and members of the committee for inviting me today. Definitely, I'm excited to be here. And part of the presentation I was told is getting to know the new superintendent a little bit. So you'll definitely get to know me a little bit. And I'll talk about some of my previous work that I've done and I think is applicable to Maryland as well. So with that, I'll jump right in. Two things I'm going to go over today. One, I will go over how our students are doing, right? Both coming out of and then going back into COVID, to use an expression, and just to give our students' results look in comparison to our national peers. And then I will also be talking about a specific area of the blueprint that actually is something I am very passionate about as well, is called the Neighborhood Indicators of Poverty. And I will talk about what that work entails and where it could go potentially in the future. So I'll start right off with assessments results. So one of the things you'll get to know about me, and if you have not been able to tune into some of the recent board meetings, I am very big on research and just constantly looking at where the research is pointing to in terms of how to better serve our students, or what is it telling us. And so a national study, several are coming out now, now that we have assessment results across the country. We had the vast majority of the country in virtual learning for a very long time. Maryland was one of the few states that had an extended period, right? We were third from last in coming back fully in person for all of our kids. And so a study was done of 12 states with assessment results to see how students have done. And what you can see is drops across the board, especially in mathematics. In mathematics, double-digit drops. In English, not so much in terms of double-digit drops, but across the board drops still. And these 12 states, one of the things that they saw and found was the mode of instruction did impact the severity of the drop. And so those who were in virtual or hybrid saw bigger drops than those who were able to come back to in-person or retain in-person learning for longer periods of time. So just to contextualize the national picture for you. Here is a state example before I go into results. So Texas, which was my old stomping grounds, Texas gave the assessment in spring. So well over close to 100% of its kids took the assessment. Maryland chose to give a waiver and not take the assessment last spring and give that test in the fall, and the U.S. Department of Ed allowed for that. So what you see in Texas is you see years of progress in algebra, as you see, and then you see what the pandemic did, right? It wiped out those gains. And reading, not so much, but also, you know, a dip, but just you can see just from Texas alone in terms of what the results did in terms of being in a state of virtual learning for a long time and taking the assessment. I'm going to give you our results. So we have our results now. So our students took a modified version of the assessment this fall in October. And now we have the results and the data is coming in. So you can see from 2019, when we were during our quote unquote normal times to comparison to coming back this fall, how students did. And as you can see, drops. I mean, just looking at algebra alone. But you can see again, math drops are quite significant. English, not as so much, but again, we are seeing drops. I'm gonna give you a closer look at this across student subgroups. So here are our subgroups broken down by racial demographics. And as you can see, the arrow is moving not in the upward positive direction. And so this is the 2019 results. And then you're seeing the current results. And you can see the proficiency baseline has dropped. So I've been telling everyone we have new baselines. We must embrace our new baselines and just get to work. And so as you can see, very strong drops across the board. And this is just cuts across not just those who are historically disadvantaged, but also those who are non-farms, for example, or non-Title I. So this is in English language arts in grades 3 to 8. Here's math, grades 3 through 8. Again, you are seeing drops in the negative direction in terms of proficiency rates. Students who were already performing low, you know, they're dropping, but because, you know, there isn't much more to drop to, but students who are performing higher, you're seeing bigger drops because there's more to drop from in terms of baselines. Here's another look at algebra. So in algebra, you can see, again, very big drops across the board in terms of our students and where they are when it comes to proficiency baselines and where we're starting from. So this is essentially gives you a look at what our new baselines are, right? And where we're working off of as we recover and accelerate and ensure every one of our students are set up for success this year and beyond. I like to talk about what Maryland's performance also looked like before COVID. So this is something I've presented a couple of times now. So those of you who may have seen it, my apologies, but I really like to study cohort data. I like to look at cohorts of kids and see how they did, because there's lessons in cohorts. What was it about that cohort that enabled them to perform at a higher level than the other cohort? So this is taking cohort data before COVID-19, right? These are during normal times, right? What you're looking at as a group of third graders who were not proficient at the beginning of the year in third grade, at the end of third grade, and then you're looking at them 2 years later at the end of fifth grade. And so what you can see is not many kids move towards the proficiency bar 2 years going into the system, going through the system, right? And then the other side of the slide that I'm showing you is the green bars is kids who were proficient. There's actually kids who lose proficiency 2 years later at the end of fifth grade. So the reason I like to point this out is, right, normal is not going to be good enough, right? Acceleration, it's a word that you hear often right now coming from the US Department of Ed. This is acceleration we're gonna have to do better than we have been doing, right? Because even in regular times, we were not accelerating as we should have been. And as you guys know, very well know, kids, if they're not reading by third grade, it just gets harder and harder and harder to close the gap. You guys are all familiar with the nation's report card, the NAEP. One of the things that I like to often show is the NAEP results adjusted by demographics. So the Urban Institute, right, our nation's report card data is not presented based on demographic adjustments. It's just raw proficiency scores and looking at that. The Urban Institute did a rigorous study to look at what it looks like when you adjust from the demographics and how do demographically adjusted peers across states perform. As you can see, even when adjusting for demographics, there are still a number of states that outperform Maryland in grade 4 reading. And as you can see, other states shoot up with very different policy conditions and other reforms as well. I often like to show this because it is very important, right, for the long-term success of our state is we have to do well by all kids. The Massachusetts finding is very interesting because oftentimes people say, well, the state's demographics is more affluent, has lower shares of minority students, but when you adjust for demographics, they still hold up in the top echelons of performance when it comes to the nation's report card. So this is an area just showing again, before COVID, we have work to do. This is in reading. Math, you see the same thing. Maryland again, not very much movement when you adjust demographically. And then
Dr. Chowdhury, take a second to share what adjusting, the implications for adjusting.
Absolutely.
Obviously, in poverty and race,
Yep.
what does the standard become for the 50 states?
The standard essentially becomes is you are adjusting for the types of kids you serve. So their special education status, their racial demographics, their poverty status. You're looking at the demographics. So you're looking at, what's the share of Black students that this state serves in comparison to the other states, and how are they doing with them? And so that's essentially the adjustment that you're seeing. When you usually see them presented, you're just seeing raw proficiency scores, not adjusted by demographics. So which tends to often skew by affluence and such. So here what you're seeing is demographically adjusted scores. So Mississippi, for example, right? They have done a lot to reform reading. They have done several other things as well. So you're seeing it adjusted, right? They are growing their kids, and it is showing up here in terms of the number of movement that they are. Doesn't necessarily mean more kids are proficient yet, but it means kids are growing and they're moving towards that. So that's how I would describe it. So I'll keep going forward. This is the part that I'm most excited to share with you about. We have work to do, no doubt. One of the charges of the department is to develop, explore, and recommend, and ultimately, hopefully, develop and implement is alternative indicators of poverty. And you can see there was a House Bill 1206 going back to 2019, where there was a charge to look at census data and other measures to be able to define poverty in a different way beyond just the freedom to lunch measure. And we also know more of our school districts are moving to the community eligibility provision, which means less paperwork, but it also complicates your poverty count, which ultimately tracks with funding. We have also began using the farms, the economically disadvantaged percentage in the state using direct certification. I'm excited that we have been recently greenlit from USDA to do a pilot to begin to do Medicaid, so that will help. But again, those measures don't accurately provide account for how many students are living in poverty. Great for lunch, right? Let's not complicate how to get lunch through forms, but difficult for funding. So one of the things that the department was supposed to do is publish an interim report, which we did, and submit it to the General Assembly. So I want to share with you what that work looks like so far. So one of the things I do want to contextualize for this work is there is growing research on the effects of concentrated poverty. It is one thing to be poor. It is one thing to live in poverty, and those surrounded by you day to day are also living in the same conditions. And there is growing research about the double disadvantage that kids in concentrated poverty have. And we have many communities across our state that also, many students and communities that do fit the definition for concentrated poverty. So this research around moving beyond just the farms measure or individual student identifier and looking where the student lives and goes to school is a national movement. So the way we started this work, this interim work, is looking at the census. So just a reminder, right? The census is broken up into block groups, tracts, and counties. And so the way I like to often do is to give a visual. So the giant square is a county, right? A smaller square from that piece is a tract. And then the block group is at the most smallest level at the census level. We ran the data at the block group level. So the state of Maryland as a whole is made up of 3,926 census block groups. And so what we essentially did is look at all of our census block groups and rack and stack them against each other and gave them a socioeconomic score across 4 factors. And I'll talk about those 4 factors. So those 4 factors include median income, the organization of the household, single parent household, or a traditionally dual parent household, looking at home ownership and education levels, which is further broken down by some high school, some college, etc. So those 4 things served as the basis of our interim analysis of looking at Maryland's counties at the block level and where our kids are going to school. And so you take all of that, you rack and stack them against each other, and you essentially create tiers of poverty or depths of poverty. So what does Maryland look like? So here's a view of Maryland using that methodology that I said. So the way I want you to think about this is tier 5 is the biggest, the highest depth of poverty in Maryland. So a child living in a tier 5 neighborhood or going to schools with more students with tier 5 qualities, right? They're more likely to make they're more likely to be in a household making $46,000. They're less likely to own a home, more likely to be in a single parent household, less likely to be in a household with individuals with higher levels of education. And here's the key part of it, and be surrounded by individuals with similar qualities. Tier 1, the opposite of that, right? More affluent, more likely to own their home, less likely to be in a single parent household, and more likely to be around individuals who also have similar qualities like that. There's a huge difference living in a neighborhood where you are in concentrated poverty in, for example, areas of Baltimore City versus, say, living in an area like Howard County and what that looks like. And so just that's how I want you to think about in terms of this block level analysis. So here is what Maryland looks like, color coded. And so the way here's our state. And I'm going to go deeper and show you some specific maps of counties, but essentially the red areas are the higher depth of poverty areas, tier 5, lower SES, and tier 1 is the more affluent communities with higher levels of socioeconomic status. So I'm going to zoom in, right? And to show you what our school systems look like broken down against this analysis. So here are all of our 24 school systems. And what you can see is these are the students that they are serving. These are the communities and neighborhoods that the characteristics of the neighborhoods and the students that they are serving have across the block analysis. So Baltimore City alone, right, more than 50% of the student body it serves comes from tier 5 neighborhoods. But Baltimore City is not alone with serving high levels of students who live in tier 5 communities and have tier 5 characteristics. Of course, as you can see, there's very big variation across our counties. I often like to say all poverty is not the same, and you can't treat all poverty in the same, you can't respond to all poverty in the same manner. So again, Baltimore City is not alone in terms of serving a large number of students coming from tier 5 communities. Let's go a little deeper. So here's the state average of 42.8%. And what counties are along with the city who serve above a student body who come from the lowest 2 tiers, tier 4 and 5 combined. So as you can see, Allegheny, Baltimore City, Caroline, Dorchester, Kent, right, like Comico, these are school systems that a good chunk of their student body live in communities and neighborhoods of concentrated poverty and come from those communities. And so just to give you a sense of the depth of poverty our school systems every day and our teachers and our staff and our principals have to take on, as while also ensuring a quality education for our kids. Let me show you some maps. So here's Howard County versus Prince George's County, broken up by the depth of poverty. So you can see where the the depth of poverty, high depth of poverty tier 5 neighborhoods are in Prince George's County. Those are those red areas. And then of course you can see where the other areas where tier 1 communities are. I often like to say housing policy is education policy. And here you go, you see housing policy and education policy playing out here. You know, I often like to say God did not create these lines. These are upheld through policy decisions every day. And so here's an example of 2 counties using that analysis. Let me show you another one. Here's Baltimore City and Montgomery County. So again, Baltimore City, no surprise, as I said in the previous slide, serves a high student concentration of living in tier 5 neighborhoods, hence all of the red. And of course, as you see, the northern part of the city, more affluent. Montgomery County, as you can see, there's pockets of tier 5 communities, while the surrounding communities around it tend to be more tier 1. And so this is early analysis that we've done. Let me talk about what you can do with this work. And so this is work I started when I was in Dallas. I was in Texas almost 10 years. And then I brought it to San Antonio, and I'll talk about how we used it. And then I convinced the Texas legislature to adopt it and take it statewide. And so this was adopted in something called Texas House Bill 3. And essentially it did 2 things. One, it redefined how compensatory education is doled out. Compensatory education, we have it here, right? It's more dollars for students living in poverty. Well, what Texas did is before it was using the farms measure. It was using Title I. What we said in Texas is that's not a good measure. Use the tier measure instead. And so they were able to pass this, which means that school systems serving high percentage of tier 4, tier 5 students got more dollars. And I'll talk about what San Antonio got, which was my most recent stomping grounds. The next thing we did is launch a statewide career ladder initiative. And essentially teachers got an allotment based on where they were in the career ladder and the type of school and community they lived in. So the tier system was used to give an allotment, and I'll talk about what that allotment was. So rural and high needs communities, urban communities, and schools that serve disproportionately tier 5, tier 4 students, teachers there who are at a specific step in the career ladder got a higher allotment. They had the biggest edge to recruit the absolute most accomplished teachers to come, or incentivize those who are already there to stay. So let me talk about what this looks like. So here's Texas, just if you were interested in what Texas looks like in compared to Maryland. Texas has 5.5 million children. So this is the analysis of that tier analysis in comparison to Texas. As you can see, Maryland is a more affluent state. Tier 5 in Texas is $28,000, right? In Maryland, it's $46,000. But again, just to give you a comparison of what it looks like and that sense. So let me keep going forward so I can give you some case study. So here's what the block analysis looked like when I first ran it in Dallas. And so this was me with my team, like, hey, because I have been reading a lot of research on how much neighborhoods matter and where kids grow up. Raj Chetty has done that research, right? High opportunity neighborhoods, low opportunity neighborhoods. And so this is what Dallas looks like using this approach. When I first ran it, I used 4 blocks. And then when we took it statewide, added a 5th tier because Texas is big. So this is Dallas ISD, my old stomping grounds, 808 census blocks. And again, you can see a north-south divide. That white splotch that you see is Highland Park ISD, a school district that seceded from the city, 0% Title I, right? And that airport is Dallas Love Field, headquarters of Southwest Airlines. But just to give you a sense of what it looks like in another city, and just, again, housing policy is also education policy. Let me talk about San Antonio, just because this is my most recent position and the work that we did here. So San Antonio ISD is a 90% plus Title I district, farms district. It is predominantly Hispanic, 6% Black, 19% English language learners, 12% special education. And it is surrounded by Bexar County, where San Antonio lives, is made up of 17 different school districts. So one of the benefits of Maryland is keeping our county school districts intact rather than having so many different school districts that can exacerbate inequality, segregation, funding, et cetera. So San Antonio is dead in the middle. It's the urban district district of San Antonio, of Bexar County, but all of these districts that you see, the more affluent ones in the north, Edgewood is where the famous Rodriguez versus San Antonio case that went up to the Supreme Court that really changed how education could be funded in this country, is also in Bexar County. So just to give you a sense of what San Antonio looks like. Here is San Antonio. This is not Texas. The San Antonio border, just so you know, looks like Texas when you carve it out. It just happens to be one of those things. And so San Antonio's border has similar qualities to Baltimore City. And again, very, very high tier 4, tier 5 areas, especially tier 5. I often, if you go back and I show you redlining maps from the 30s, it looks exactly the same in 2021. I can overlay them and I can literally not much has changed. And so this is San Antonio ISD. So we clearly serve and continue to serve my former colleagues, high poverty students in high depth of poverty communities. Here's San Antonio ISD in comparison to those 17 districts that I told you that make up Bexar County. And look at San Antonio ISD, 82% of its kids, of its almost 50,000 students are in tier 5 and tier 4 neighborhoods. Edgewood ISD, right? 75% of its students come from tier 5 communities. And of course, Northeast and Alamo Heights, Northside, those are more affluent suburban communities that are only 20 minutes away, by the way. They are more balanced in terms of the student population they serve and also more skews towards affluence. What you're seeing there in terms of the weight, the decimal points, this is the comp ed reform that Texas did. Texas essentially said is if you serve more tier 4, tier 5 students, we will give you a higher weight. So what does that look like? San Antonio ISD, again, 90% Title I district, was getting about $50 million in comp ed dollars. Under the new model, it gets over $80 million. So 30 plus more million dollars because of the depth of need it has. And those dollars have to go to specific areas in terms of investment. So just to give you a sense of San Antonio ISD and its needs. Here is what the teacher incentive allotment looks like. Another key reform Texas made. It essentially said teachers who teach in schools and districts, rural and urban, who serve disproportionately tier 4 and 5 neighborhoods, they will get an allotment closer to $32,000. Those who teach in lower poverty communities who are also in a career ladder step, the allotment on top of base pay is $3,000. And by the way, that allotment comes directly from the state. It's not wealth equalized or anything. It just comes from the state. It was a big deal. It crossed party lines as well when it passed. But essentially what you're seeing here is the San Antonio district in Bexar County applied to the 5-tier model. And just to show you the number of schools we would have where teachers can generate that higher allotment on top of base pay, which I said is upwards to $30,000. So let me show you one example of what we did with it in San Antonio. So we launched our Master Teacher Initiative. Basically, it was our career ladder initiative. It has to have at least 3 levels of the career ladder, and we called it Recognized, Exemplary, and Masters. If you're nationally board certified, you automatically got the recognized status, but that wasn't the only way to get there, but automatically national board got you at recognized. But if you are a master teacher teaching at our high depth of poverty school in the east and west side of San Antonio, your allotment at the master teacher career ladder is another $26,500 on top of base pay. And by the way, that money comes directly from the state. And now if you moved as a teacher, and that's good for 5 years, and you went off to Highland Park in Dallas, that allotment would drop. It would drop to the 3,000, 5,000 range because it's a zero poverty district. And so, but you will still get an allotment. So the whole idea is rural districts, urban districts, high poverty schools have the biggest edge to recruit our most accomplished teachers. And so this is an example, and this is built off of that alternative indicator of poverty that I said. Another thing we did in San Antonio as I wind down is we we used it to create for our school choice opportunities. So what we did is, while you figure out how to do high poverty schools well, we also launched these schools, what we call our diverse by design campuses, where they were open enrollment schools that brought families that by design were socioeconomically diverse and integrated. So what you're seeing here is a school called the Advanced Learning Academy that we launched. It's a pre-K-12 school with Trinity University. It's a teacher lab school where we grow our own teachers, where 50% of the school was reserved for families from low income backgrounds, and the other 50% was for high income backgrounds. And again, this school was purposely designed to be diverse. And what you're seeing is we opened up our borders to be able to serve a broader community, because all of the affluence, right, did not live in our borders. It was more in the northern part of the city. Just to show you another way you could think about how you use this tier methodology. So how is San Antonio doing? I do like to talk about it with some sense of pride. 5 years ago, we had, of our 50,000 kids, 35,000 of them were attending low performing, or what Texas called F-rated schools. I'm not a fan of the A through F rating, but they were low performing schools. 35,000 out of the 50,000. Today, it is at 2,000, a little over 2,000. That's too many still, but just to show you in terms of what progress could look like. We tripled the number of A and B rated campuses. We outperformed statewide gains. And the thing I'm most proud of is our 10% of our students were graduating college ready in 2015. Today, it's 68%.
Dr. Chowdhury, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
If we can bring this to the implications for going ahead in Maryland.
Yes.
We appreciate the Texas example and the Texas experience.
Yeah.
But what does this mean for us going forward? And some of this parallels the Kerwin proposal, some do not.
Yep. Yeah, let me wind down and I'll tell you them.
Let's get into that if we can.
Yeah.
We can review these in terms of Texas.
So just really quickly before I go into that, the department is in strategic planning mode. Please push to your stakeholders this survey. It is very important. The state board and the department are kicking off a strategic plan, and we would really like for thousands of Marylanders to weigh in on the direction of the department as it anchors the blueprint. So in terms of implications, when it comes to the comp ed, let me go here. We need to think about, right, how we're measuring poverty right now, and how we're doling out our resources. And are they going to the right places, and are they landing towards the right initiatives? And so one of the implications that I would push us to think about is that we can't just simply rely on farms in Title I. We have to look at poverty differently. We have to think about, right, the types of challenges our school systems have at the school level, and what does the resources that we direct to them generate, and where should those resources go? And the reason why I was talking about that Texas example is because of this. In Texas, they used it in two ways. They redefined how comp ed is doled out. Right now, we use farms in the state of Maryland. In Texas, they shifted away from farms and they're using the tiered methodology. Right now in our blueprint law, we have a $10,000 bonus for national support certified teachers. And if they move to a low performing school, $7,000. So that's 17. I would say that's not enough to be able to transform high minority, high poverty schools. We need to do more. And what that looks like, it's up to us to figure out. But one example of that could be looking at a tiered methodology of poverty, and based on where they are in the career ladder, rather than thinking low performing school, think in terms of the poverty level of that school and demographics, and then give an allotment based on that. So those are two implications that I would share in terms of the neighborhood of indicators of poverty. Again, this was an interim report. We gave it to the assembly to think about. We gave examples, not in only Texas. I gave you a New Mexico example. I gave you some others. But again, this is something that I would push the assembly to think about as it thinks to refine the direction of the amazing investments the blueprint's about to make over the next 10 years. So I will take questions, any other questions you have right now. Thank you.
Okay, before I recognize, and I'm sure there'll be plenty, The Blueprint for Maryland's Future also put in concentrated poverty. It recognized that people who live and go to school in areas of concentrated poverty was another way to get to putting more additional resources. So how does the concentrated poverty included in the blueprint either fulfill or not fulfill some of what you've talked about?
The concentrated poverty grants are still based on the farms measure, right? It's based on like if the schools are 50% or more, right? Sorry, if they're 80% and then it comes down to 50% over the years, right? To give more dollars, but it's still based on the farms measure, which is still a big deal, right? More money is needed for students in poverty and disadvantage to be able to get it right. Absolutely, hands down, research shows this, but it is not based on the kinds and depth of poverty they have, right? There's a huge difference, as I was showing around the tiered methodology of students living in communities in concentrated poverty who have these characteristics versus students living in a school that is, 50% farms, but it's 50% farms in, say, Columbia versus an area in Baltimore City. Those are things to think about when it comes to the types of dollars that we are giving school systems at the school level. And so that is one implication, Chair Pinsky, that I would say to think about as we continue to refine our work.
Okay, committee, if you have questions, concerns, curiosity, here's an opportunity. Let's start with Senator Carrozza, and I think in your charts you showed, I think 3 or 4 counties on the Eastern Shore that were showing significant poverty. So with that, Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I also want to thank you for the extra effort you've made in visiting our school districts. I've heard specifically from all 3 of my school superintendents. And I actually let them know that I would be receiving this briefing today and asked if there were any concerns that they wanted me to raise. And I have 2 questions, one coming directly from our local school superintendents on the Eastern Shore, and 2, one dealing with our non-public schools. Earlier at the end of December, the Eastern Shore Maryland Educational Consortium wrote to the governor and to the leadership of the Senate and the House, pointing out some of the challenges of moving forward, impact of COVID, and what that would mean in moving ahead. And specifically in the area of the implementation of the blueprint plans, they have requested, and I'd be happy to forward the letter to you, and they may have brought it up in the meetings, to look at modifying the time for the local school systems to file their blueprint implementation plans to address local needs. And that goes back to your presentation about focusing on what's going on in the schools and locally. They specifically brought up, if we don't have the Accountability and Implementation Board hasn't finished their work, then how can the local school systems be expected to put their final implementation plans in place? So I wanted to raise that to you, and I will send you the letter if you have not already received it. And then on the non-public school side, I wanted to raise the issue about the emergency assistance for non-public schools, that apparently it's been delayed because it took MSDE about a year to put in a structure for the application process. So now I understand MSDE has moved ahead, but there seems to be a lot of questions about, in a short time frame, how these non-public schools can access these funds regarding what type of services and vendors that they can work with. I will send that follow up with details, but I did want to raise it because they definitely want to be able to leverage those funds, and there's a short window to do so, and we may need some additional support in order to make sure those non-public schools benefit from the funds coming down to the state of Maryland.
Okay, Mr. Superintendent, on the first question, I'm going to jump in here a little bit.
Yep.
In terms of the implementation plans, the administration did not release money for the AIB to begin their work and to hire people. So I think everyone acknowledges that the dates for the plan, their statewide plan, which is due mid-February, which is only 3 weeks away, and the local jurisdictions, which is set for mid-June, are unreasonable. But the AIB was not able to get started for multiple reasons in terms of their formal swearing in by the governor and then releasing money for them to do their work. So there are questions, and I've spoken to the AIB, of either we can just turn our heads and know it's going to be later or put in emergency legislation. So the implementation plans is acknowledged by, I think, everyone that they're going to be difficult or impossible to complete at that point. I think people just have to figure out whether we're going to change the legislative or just let the clock run and come up with a new date. So that I've been working on that very issue. That's why I insert myself here. Back to you, Dr. Chowdhury.
Yeah, I wanted to say that on the implementation plans, the department will actually be recommending a modified timeline that it gives them more breathing room to develop their plans. And I've been very closely working with the AIB as it comes together and engaging the board members as well around this. This deals with both not just the implementation plans as well as some other timelines such as the college and career readiness pathways our students have to access after 10th grade. So there's no daylight between me and school systems on that modified, and I've been engaging them on this. On the second one, on the EANS piece, I don't want to take up this entire session around this, but it's important to know that the EANS program has a lot of different conditions around it. This tight timeline is because we are trying to make the deadline for the Board of Public Works to be able to procure these items. But the other reason for it is we've been working closely with the governor's office in this money moves to the GEARS pot, the governor's pot, and it is more flexible in that pot that he plans to support non-public schools with. And in that pot, it does not have poverty requirements in terms of the only schools that serve disadvantaged student groups can only access it, right? It can also be a more flexible pot with a longer window and everything else. So we're trying to get through this box of U.S. Department of Ed requirements out of the way, and see who wants to get services through here. But really, we wanted to go into the GEARS funding, the GEARS pot, which will be more flexible, and the governor has committed to provide that funding support to non-public schools in that more flexible way. So,
okay, let's go to Vice Chair, followed by Senator Ellis, and then followed by Senator Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chowdhury, it's really such a pleasure to have a superintendent who communicates and who is so focused on details and data and collaboration. And we don't know each other much yet, but I just have to say that so far, just thumbs up. So thank you, and really glad that you're here. I have a lot of questions, but I know that a lot of my colleagues have questions too. So I'm going to put a bunch of things on the table and then we can follow up offline, but I at least want to ask them publicly, and you decide whether you want to speak briefly to some of them or how you want to do that. First off, I think census by block is really smart. When you showed the map of Montgomery County, there are a lot of people who think Montgomery County is all rich folks. Yes, that. The ones with all the colors is mostly my district. And I am very proud, as my colleagues have heard me say a billion times, very proud to be the senator for Rockville and Gaithersburg. And it's because of our economic, linguistic, and ethnic diversity that I am so thrilled to represent them. The challenge, so question one, the challenge is, how do you make sure that people don't just say, oh, Montgomery County is mostly fine, mostly affluent, mostly two-parent households, all that, when there are clearly economic challenges in chunks of our county? So that's question one. Next, you and I have spoken before about ELL, the English language learners, and the enormous challenges. And I know that you, especially, and I, to a lesser extent, have been working on that and focused on that as part of the blueprint. And since with implementation, I would love an update for the full committee on ELL. Mental health. I have a cousin who is a mental health counselor in schools. And we know that our kids really, especially through COVID, really need the support. We heard on the Senate this morning about another death by suicide. of a visible person. And we've just lost too many young people and too many people to death by suicide. And I just wonder if you could briefly address that. And then last question was going to be about blueprint funding, but I think the chair and Senator Carosa kind of, and in your answer, kind of started that, but I am worried about the implications of the governor's budget and whether there is going to be sufficient funding for our public schools around the state that are really in need of more staff and more support. So I know that's a ton, but I appreciate any answers you might be able to give on some of those.
The question.
Dr. Chowdhury, we have a lot of questions, so pick the one of those four you can explicitly address.
Yes, on the how to make sure that, for example, in Montgomery County, those red areas and the schools in those areas, you fund at the school level and you put policy requirements around it. For example, in Texas, that allotment that teacher generates, 90% of that money has to stay at the school. Central office can't take it to do and play games with it or do something else with it. So you basically create policy areas that say, if you're going to get compensatory ed funding, then and at that school level, then it has to go to that school for these purposes. So that's how you do it. And so you make sure that at the school level, that funding that's targeted at the school, you put policy parameters with it. Some flexibility, but within bounds to make sure that it does right by those kids. And then the last one that I'll take is on the mental health piece. We are going to be doing a big mental health deep dive next month, but simply put, we need to basically make mental health a recurring normal part of the student's experience every day. It cannot be one-off services. You have to, just like the Ready to Read Act is designed to screen for reading deficiencies in students and respond to them, we need to have a process in place for all our kids annually that screens for mental health. Make it systematic, make it a guaranteed process of the K-12 experience. I'll just stop there for those things.
Thank you, Mr. Chowdhury. Would love to.
Senator Ellis. Thank you, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman Pinsky. Dr. Chowdhury, thank you so much. I share Senator Kagan's enthusiasm about your expertise and your approach to data. And obviously, you are very proud of what you've done in Texas. Obviously, that was a major reason why you were hired here in Maryland. And my question is, how much of current Maryland law, say for the blueprint, will allow you to do or to replicate what you've done in Texas? I mean, those numbers, I think in the San Antonio area where, the performance of students went way high. I mean, I'm so impressed with that. I look forward to seeing those numbers. So the tools you have now with the blueprint and other Maryland laws, does it give you the authority to duplicate what you did in Texas?
I think I've been digging into Maryland law. I think the department needs to be more active, and there's laws in the books that have been there for a very long time, even before the blueprint, and the department just has not exercised it. I recently met with Mr. Thornton to talk about the Bridge to Excellence, and he told me, you got to use the authorities you already have in the books to ensure everyone does right by kids. And frankly, they're in the books. Now, there are things that can be refined, right? There are things we can refine in the blueprint. There are things we can do to ensure low performing schools, there is urgency around them. I think we need to strengthen those. There are things we need to do around reading to further strengthen that, to make sure that reading is taught exactly what we know the research says. Those are things I would like to see over time. But in terms of the department being like, hey, I'm going to put my arms around your school system and we got to figure this out, they're in the books. I just need to act upon them. And I won't be shy. I'll just put it that way. And I rather apologize later for overreaching too much rather than just sitting back and letting things happen. So
Okay, thank you. Really quick, Mr. Chair, one quick follow-up. So the allotments for the teachers you referred to, is that for their pay or monies they get for their classroom, for supplies, or for whatever?
That's for their pay, but the school systems can design. So if you are a teacher, Senator Ellis, at a school that serves Tier 5 kids and you're a master teacher and you generated $32,000, the school system can decide if it wants to give you the full $32,000 or $15,000 of that. But the rule is 90% of your $32,000 you generate has to go to stay at that school. So what you see is rural school systems and high poverty school systems that tend to have lower tenure teachers at higher turnover. turnover, they're giving teachers the full allotment. So we have $100,000 teachers in our school systems in Texas, and it's good for 5 years. And that allotment comes fully from the state. That's the
And
key
goes
thing.
to, I'm sorry, it goes to the teachers for salaries.
Goes to the teachers on salary on top of base pay, and it's pensionable.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Washington.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for this presentation. This is the second time our Baltimore City delegation had the opportunity to get some of your preliminary. It's good to see the entire statewide analysis. I too, say me too, I share the enthusiasm of my colleagues around your willingness to look at the data and to understand the urgency that we have. Education being the #1 priority of most Marylanders, right? We care most about education, and we know how education impacts other issues. I think it might be interesting, and I don't know if you've done sort of a time, and this gets to the first question. Yeah, this is great. Back to the 17. Yeah, there we go. If you did it over time, you probably see sort of a spreading out, right? When you talk about the concentration of poverty. So probably over time, if you did that analysis, you'd see a few blocks, and then you'd see it spread out. And that gets to your point about economic. Have you done sort of a time series of these maps?
Not in Maryland. I've done it in Texas, and specifically San Antonio and Dallas. I'll tell you one thing. Yes, you start seeing in your suburban or other counties that are beginning to serve students living in poverty more and more. But I'll tell you, in the big urban cities and such, you might say, oh, people often say it's gentrifying. You actually don't see a lot of shifts in decades because, housing is still segregated. And so it's essentially, that's what plays out. And I, as I said, I can show you San Antonio's maps, and I bet I can do this with Baltimore City. Go back to the 1930s, the homeowners corporation loan maps, and fast forward to here, and the areas would still look the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was more to the Montgomery County. I think that you'd see that over time. But I also appreciate very much on this map and doing the census block, as I said, is very important, and it's very consistent with the community school model. And I know that Texas also implemented almost universal community school model, as it was designed to really be targeted in the community, and that the money goes in the community, and understanding the school as a center. Do you see that combination, or do you see that part of the blueprint? And are there things that we could do to accelerate that or expand the community school model to be more consistent with how it was designed?
Absolutely. You have to do community schools and make sure you have the most accomplished teachers for our highest needs kids. You have to do both. I often like to say, my wife's going to hate it that I said it like this. I was a damn good teacher because I was a damn good social worker too in South Los Angeles. And I shouldn't have to be a social worker. I should just focus on teaching. And the community schools piece, what I didn't talk about in San Antonio or Dallas are there areas of us turning some of our schools strategically into wraparound centers that are open till 10 p.m. Our nonprofits take some of the floors over so families can get services. But at the same time, where I wanted to talk about is also ensuring that we have our most accomplished teachers, because those students need it. They do not have the benefits of socioeconomic status being able to help push through their educational career and trajectory. They are going to need game-changing teachers there each and every day. So you got to do both.
And this is a statewide issue you're seeing, and it's a bipartisan. You see Wacomico, you see Baltimore City, you see Allegheny, you see Kent, you see portions of Howard County, everywhere. Our state. There's nowhere where we don't have students of need. And so I really appreciate this. And I hope my colleagues, we all see this together, that this is something we need to address together. Isn't that so? Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Simon Ayer, please.
Yes, thank you. It's nice seeing you again. It was good meeting with you this fall, and I appreciate you taking time to meet with me. I found it fascinating, some of the things you brought up. And I kind of wish you were around here when we were developing the Kerwin program. The topic of poverty indicator, and just in my district, I have many different areas. I have very wealthy, I have very poor areas just within my district alone. And you said something about that our current indicators are with just the farm measures and not the kinds and depths of poverty. Mm-hmm. Is there something we can do in the future, something with the Kerwin funding related to poverty to try to get more of the results like you were showing in Texas? Is that something we can refine?
Yeah, you can always go back and say compensatory ed going forward, or the concentration of poverty measure will be measured in this way. Right now, Kerwin lays out, right, if it's 80% farms, this is how much money they'll get. And then over time, anyone who's 50% above. But you can say going forward, this additional funding will be based on this new methodology. So if you literally go to House Bill 3 in Texas, there's this whole section that my team co-wrote with, our legislative partners to be able to get this right. So you can do that. Doesn't mean Maryland can't change the methodology. We equally weight it in our methodology. You could say median household income weighs more on it if you want. But yes, there are things you can do. You can go in and say the concentration of poverty measure is going to be measured in this way going forward, and this is how the multiplier effect will play out. You can say teachers who teach at schools that disproportionately serve this amount of students at this level of poverty are going to get a higher amount in terms of a bonus or a stipend if they choose to commit or come there. You can do those things. This is essentially why I was presenting this as things to think about as we continue to refine it over time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Senator Fry Hester, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Superintendent. It's great to see you. As you can tell, this committee is enthusiastic about education.
Yes.
There was a couple questions that Senator, our Vice Chair asked. One was about mental and behavioral health, and you may recall that there was like a 10-page amendment in the blueprint that dealt with mental behavioral health and the community supports partnership. And the second one was about the governor's budget and what we can versus what we can't do based on the budget. Mm-hmm. I know we're short on time right now. I'm just wondering if you or your staff might be willing to meet with us, again, just to get a little deeper into the weeds, because I think we're really curious and we're glad that you're here.
Absolutely. Thank you. If you want to keep inviting me, I'll keep coming. Yeah, so if you keep inviting me, I'll keep coming to share whatever. I'm not shy to engage. So please do if you would like to learn more into the weeds on the funding matter. So
the funding and the mental health behavior.
The mental health work. Yeah, I think those two things deserve just even separate deep dive. So please invite us and we're happy to share.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Chowdhury, I want to talk about the slide for a moment. If you look at the educational level, for example, between tier 4 and 5, it's about 7 percentage points. If you look between tier 2 and tier 1, it's about 7 percentage points. If you look between tier 2 and tier 4, it's about 7 percentage points. In other words, it's almost like they're 3 pods, not 5 pods. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is whether we have 5 categories or 4 categories or some number of categories, I'm not sure there's any magic. I'm not sure our goal is to recreate a 5-tiered system. I understand your concerns about using farms. And in fact, we've been talking a long time of not using farms, shifting to possibly Medicaid, for example. So we don't rely on people filling out a form and submitting it. People in poverty are on Medicaid, unfortunately. But I guess a bigger question, have you crosswalked, say, Medicaid numbers for our children in poverty and your index to see really if there's any variation? In other words, I want to create a new model if in fact we have other indicators that get us to the same place. And so I guess you haven't talked about your crosswalk of creating a new model versus what we're using, however limited it may be.
Yeah, so that's the next report. Yeah, I owe you guys a final report in December 2022. The interim report was submitted just to begin thinking about this. I'm doing the crosswalk right now. We actually have 6 school systems that are part of a work group where we're looking at, what this looks like. And the biggest crosswalk that you ultimately have to do is this indicator more predictive of achievement or the other one? Which one is more predictive of achievement? And so the piece that the Medicare and direct certification.
Dr. Chowdhury, of achievement or of poverty? In other words, we're talking two different things.
Well, no, I'm talking about the poverty indicator, predictive of achievement. What correlates stronger, right? And so that's what I meant to say there. But the problem with just relying on direct certification and other things, what it doesn't account for is the concentrated poverty factor. And when I say concentrated poverty factor, I'm not just referring to just the school level. I'm also referring to the neighborhood and the community the child lives in. There is decades of research now, Chair Pinsky, on a child being growing up in concentrated poverty and their life trajectory versus a child is not. You can take a farm's child and move them to away from deconcentrate a different housing complex, right, where they are surrounded with more tier 2 and tier 1 students, or schools that serve a lower percentage of tier 5 students, and you will see dramatically different outcomes. And so what I am saying, and I'm with you on this, is it costs more to educate children in need. That's a given in the blueprint.
Yeah, Dr. Chowdhury, I think we'll understand that. And as you yourself said earlier, schools are segregated, housing is segregated, and unfortunately, jobs are segregated to a large degree. So, and we don't have across the state extensive busing where people, quantity or quantity or quality. For most children, are going to school near where they live, and if they're living in poverty, they're probably going to school in poverty. So, I mean, that comes as no shock to anybody on this committee. Absolutely.
But what I am saying is teachers who teach in tier 5 and tier 4 schools deserve more. Deserve more.
And Dr. Chowdhury, and again, I'm not here to defend the blueprint. We took a starting point to say that for people who've proven to be good teachers, using the National Board as one example. If they achieve that, they get 10,000. If they get high need school, however we define that, they get $7,000. I think everyone who voted for the blueprint or served on the commission would have loved to see that figure being not 7,000 but 10,000. Or 15,000. So I don't think there's any disagreement.
Absolutely.
Have greater incentives. Part of it is getting it passed in a budget in Annapolis, which leads me to the next. And on this issue, the blueprint called for a study. So
there it is. Here's the timeline for it.
Right. And so the people who voted for the blueprint understood that having a more finite, nuanced indicator to figure these kind of things out, we acknowledged that and included that in that legislation. So it's not like this is a concept.
Absolutely. You guys, look, in 2019, House Bill 1206, study census tracts and blocks legislation enacted. So the foresight was there to be able to look at this and what to do with it. And blueprint is reason number one why I was very excited to come here and weather the snow and do great work for our kids.
And the last 2 points. This morning, one of our members, Senator Ellis, actually raised a point that $126 million that we assumed was a mandate to help extra assistance, and whether it's because of concentrated poverty or another characteristic, 99 million to Baltimore City and 26 million, I believe, to Prince George's County, was contested by the administration, and they're saying it's not a mandate. Now, it's not actually in court. We're waiting for an attorney general's opinion on that. But do you understand that, in fact, could be an obstacle to investing funding in areas, whether it's not specifically proven to be high poverty or in tier 5, but obviously jurisdictions in need.
Yes, I think long term, we must make sure the funding is fully and adequately funded and sustained. I think though this year that with ESSER dollars and ARP ESSER at play, we do have the ability to get these initiatives going off the start. And the department has to lead on that. The department has to be able to show playbooks and how to implement these things well. We do need to modify the timeline a bit, right? Because of other things that we discussed earlier. But I think, at long term, absolutely, it needs to be fully funded and taken care of. But I don't think we do not have the resources to get a lot of the good things going as we speak right now. And I'm not waiting for that. And I know all 24 superintendents are not either. So.
Great. Okay. Finally, well, I see it. I don't know if their hands are back up for additional questions. I think all of us would appreciate this report electronically. These graphs and charts. And I think many of us would like to be able to slice and dice them almost to county or block to have a better understanding of how this proposal would affect all of our jurisdictions. So if that could be forwarded to us, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
We do have another hearing. I will, if these questions can be fairly brief. I see Senator Ellis has his hand up, and I see Senator Washington has a hand up. So, no. So, Senator Ellis, if this can be short.
Really short, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question you asked of Dr. Chaudhary about the lack of funding for Baltimore City and Prince George County, I didn't really get his answer. I don't know if it was a system problem I had. If you could repeat it, I think you were saying that this year we might be able to survive. Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, my answer is with the infusion of ARP ESSER and other dollars coming in at the federal level this year, I believe there is enough to get going a lot of the work of the blueprint and begin to put in the foundation. Long term though, right? We have to make sure it is fully funded and sustained over time.
So what's the acronym you use are?
The American Rescue Plan and the federal ESSER dollars, the federal acts that were where they put.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. With that, I think the offer by the state superintendent and the need of the community that we want to have another conversation at a later point. This was obviously very illuminating. We like your energy and excitement. And any lessons from Texas that can be applied in Maryland, we're clearly open on doing that. And we look forward to you working with the committee and with the oversight board to implementing the Kerwin proposal, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. So with that, we are going to close the education briefing, and we will have to reopen. I believe there's a second link on our cyber briefing. So thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Thank your staff for assistance in preparing your information, and please forward the document when that's available.